Hear laughter drift through the warm evening air. Smell the sweet scent of honeysuckle and wood smoke curling over a simple wooden fence. Watch as platters of golden fried chicken and buttered corn pass from hand to hand. Napkins tucked, smiles wide. Grandparents tell old stories while kids chase fireflies. Muddy feet slapping on cool grass. Everyone's here. Neighbors, cousins, folks from down the road, bound by food and friendship. Why did those backyard suppers feel so special? And what memories still linger? There's a reason food feels different out in the country, especially when you step back to the 1970s and let yourself smell the earth, hear summer's chorus of insects and birds, and taste recipes straight from someone's grandmother. In every humble meal, there's a story, one of survival, creativity, and family pride. Hillbilly cooking isn't about fancy gadgets or rare spices. It's stubbornly about using what you've got and turning it into something unforgettable. Picture a kitchen that's never really quiet. There's a pot simmering on the back burner, cast iron pans hanging along the wall, and the scratch of someone whisking biscuit dough by hand. The ingredients? Nearly all from just outside the door. Early in the morning, you'd see folks heading out with woven baskets to pick wild ramps from a hillside, their hands brushed green with dirt and dew. Ramps, a wild onion with a sharp, almost garlic tang, are tricky to find. Their smell clings to your skin, stronger than any perfume. Once home, they'd end up wilted in bacon grease or folded into cornbread, adding a flavor you just can't get from anything store-bought. Then there's poke greens. Now, pokeweed grows tall and brilliant purple in old pastures. Pretty, yes, but you've got to know your stuff. Harvest the young leaves, not the berries, and always boil them twice to take out the toxins. It sounds risky, but it's what gave meals their thrill and uniqueness. Poke greens taste earthy and wild, completely their own thing, and a spoonful of them next to some fried potatoes can remind someone of spring after a long winter. And you can't forget the berries, blackberries, dewberries, wineberries. The kids sent out in pairs after breakfast, baskets in hand, each thinking they'll come back with more than they eat. Lips and fingertips stained deep purple, they'd return with enough berries for a pie, or at least a bubbling, sweet cobbler. If the haul was small, that didn't stop anyone. Sometimes, a single handful made it into pancakes or a mason jar with sugar and thyme, ready for winter's lean months. But berries and wild greens were just the beginning. Take a summer evening, for example. Someone's snapping beans on the front porch, and the whole family's helping. One person nips the ends, another breaks them into just right lengths, all to the steady sound of beans hitting the bottom of a tin pail. There's laughter as someone tells the story of Grandpa catching a snapping turtle the size of a washtub. Swear it weighed more than little Susie, someone says. By sundown, there's a pot of bean soup thickening on the stove, scented with bits of leftover ham, garlic from last fall's garden, and a pinch of wild thyme if anyone remembers to gather it. Everything in this kind of cooking is shaped by the seasons. Early spring brings wild greens and ramps, later strawberries, then snap beans, then the heavy squash and tomatoes of high summer. What's ripe decides the meal. Some evenings, supper depended on what you could catch. Maybe creek-caught trout rolled in cornmeal, or squirrel, if that's what there was. Maybe the garden only gave a few scruffy carrots and potatoes. There were no grocery runs for missing ingredients. You made do, adapted, and got creative. Resourcefulness is baked into every recipe. Cast iron pans sizzle on wood-burning stoves. And if you don't have flour for biscuits, you grab cornmeal and make Johnny cakes on a slab of greased metal. People got good at substitutions. Sweet milk turns to buttermilk with a splash of vinegar. When lard's running low, bacon drippings from the breakfast skillet step in, giving biscuits a hint of smoky flavor that ties supper back to the morning. If you've only got water and beans, drop in a shin bone or ham hock and let it go low and slow, you'll end up with something hearty, the broth thick with savory goodness. Some folks remember the taste of desperation, but others remember the taste of ingenuity. Like Miss Ruby, who would say, "Don't you worry, honey. If we've got onions and beans, we're halfway to a feast." And then she'd prove it, her hands moving quick, tossing scraps into the pot, humming an old hymn under her breath. There's comfort in that hum, the way it filled up the whole kitchen, mixing with the smell of frying onions and bread toasting on the hearth. It's not just about eating, it's about traditions too. Stories get told and retold when there's a lull. Granny used to cut fat back this thick, or Uncle Lloyd could hunt a mess of morels before you even found your boots. Cooking isn't just one person's job. Onions are chopped while someone else soaks beans. There are always extra hands, and every child knows they'll get their turn rolling dough by the time they're 5. Over time, recipes shaped by hardship or plenty become family comforts and living history. Meals weren't just for hunger. They were for gathering. You'd hear a knock on the door just before dusk, a neighbor stopping by with a sack of apples or a jar of last year's relish. Everyone coming together to see what the night's supper would bring. Sometimes dinner was outdoors, everyone seated on upturned crates around a long table, passing platters of hot fried chicken, thick slices of tomato, and bowls of creamy beans. You'd hear the crackle of the fire, the cicada's steady buzz, and the clatter of spoons as folks dug in. Sometimes, those meals came together in the face of hardship. Storm flattened all the corn? Someone found a forgotten clutch of eggs in the hen house. Stretch the cornbread, stretch the story, stretch the laughter. Money's tight, but the table's never empty, because everyone knows how to make something from nothing. There's pride in making do, and in feeding everyone, even when the cupboard looks bare. Holidays and change of season meant something special. In early autumn, the first frost threatened, so baskets overflowed with the last of the beans, peppers, and squash. Those nights, folks pulled out the safe recipes, hearty soups, thick as stew, spiced up with whatever was left. Dried apples, gathered weeks before and strung up to preserve, peaked their chewy sweetness in a skillet pie. Even cleaning up is a family affair. Dishes are passed down to the kids, washed in a tub, dried on the porch railing. Adults lean back, savoring coffee made from grounds reused through the day, swapping stories and advice. These aren't just chores. They're chances to share and build, to laugh at the day's flops as much as its triumphs. Season after season, year after year, the cooking changes just enough, keeping pace with what grows, what runs dry, and what comes back again. There's a natural rhythm that ties every meal to the land. If tonight's supper is stewed tomatoes with breadcrumbs, it's because the garden gave more than anyone expected, or because everyone's craving what Granny used to make. Hillbilly cooking is about flexibility and heart. It's about never letting pride get in the way of asking a neighbor for a handful of flour, or swapping a jar of pickled beets for a wedge of cheese. It's about gathering, adapting, and sharing, and knowing that if you can put something hot and good on the table, you're rich as any king. But that wasn't even the strangest part. Some of the most legendary recipes didn't start out as anyone's favorite. They were born from total accidents or good-natured experiments. Have you heard about the night the cornbread caught fire? The story behind the mystery meat stew? We'll get to those kitchen adventures soon. But next, let's dig into what always stole the spotlight. The main dishes that graced every backyard table. When you walked into a 1970s backyard supper, the first thing that hit you was the smell. A tangled, perfect mess of smoke, sweet barbecue sauce, and sizzling fat. Sometimes, you could spot the grill before you saw the cook, a haze rising above the crowd, drawing every hungry kid and grown-up like a signal fire. The main dishes were the stars of the show, each one tasting like home, comfort, and celebration all at once. Let's start with the grilled meats. Nothing defines a Southern country supper quite like smoky barbecue ribs. Stacked high, shining with sticky sauce, the ribs usually began their journey the night before. Someone, usually Uncle Harold or Cousin June, would mix up a dry rub, rubbing it into every crevice. Brown sugar, paprika, a splash of hot sauce, salt, and black pepper. The secret? Letting those ribs sit all night, soaking up every ounce of flavor, sometimes packed in old grocery bags if there wasn't enough room in the fridge. Come morning, the fire was started low and slow, using split hickory or applewood. the smoke curling up under a battered metal lid. The ribs would cook for hours, every so often getting turned, mopped with more sauce, smelling so good half the block wandered over to check on the progress. Chicken thighs were another mainstay, easy, juicy, and hard to mess up. They could be marinated in buttermilk with crushed garlic and herbs, or just thrown on with salt, pepper, and whatever savory powder was within arm's reach. The secret to great chicken was patience. Nobody flipped them too soon. The skin needed time to get golden and crisp, the edges a little charred. Folks debated whether the drumstick or thigh was best, but everyone agreed there was no wrong answer when the chicken was done right. Next up, the pulled pork. There was always someone willing to get up at sunrise, slipping a big pork shoulder into a slow cooking pot, surrounded by onions, a wallop of homemade spice mix, and a secret dash of something special. Maybe Merker, maybe sweet tea, maybe just a good story. This pork cooked all day, going from tough to tender with each passing hour until it was soft enough to pull apart with a pair of forks. The juice soaked into soft buns, and every bite tasted like last year's memories, this year's laughter, and all the good things still to come. Sometimes, the pork went into stew or got folded into hush puppies. There were no rules, just what tasted right. Of course, you couldn't fill the table with main dishes and forget the sides. And some, like skillet cornbread, were so legendary they almost counted as mains themselves. Baked in a thick cast iron pan and brushed with bacon drippings, the cornbread came out with crackling edges and a soft, crumbly heart. Slices were cut big and rough, because nobody ever wanted just a sliver. On frugal nights, baked beans were the hero. Simple to make, just dried beans soaked all day, then simmered with molasses, smoked pork, and whatever spices were handy. They turned a few cents into a whole pot of flavor that went as well with ribs as it did with hush puppies. Some families tweaked their beans with brown sugar, some with extra onions, and some added a big glug of ketchup or even Coca-Cola for a sweet, sticky twist. Kids lined up for beans, especially if their plate also held a fat link of sausage borrowed from the smokehouse. A lot of the magic came from how these dishes were prepared. Slowly. Meat never rushed. Flavors developed over hours, not minutes. Old-timers insisted you could taste the patience in every bite. Marinating was a ritual, as if the food needed to dream for a bit before hitting the fire. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like too much trouble. But those who stayed understood, waiting, made the reward even better. Crowds gathered while the food cooked. People swapped stories about other grand suppers. Remember when the dog stole the pork butt right off the table? Or that night the grill exploded, and we ate cold beans under the porch? Everyone had a favorite disaster, and every story ended with laughter, never disappointment. Because the meal was always rescued, or remade, or simply reimagined with whatever was left. Main dishes brought everyone together, no matter what. On music nights, you could hear banjos and guitars, old songs mixing with the sound of chopping and sizzling. It was normal for someone to be singing about love or heartbreak while flipping chicken with a broken spatula. Birthdays and holidays felt extra special when another platter of ribs landed on the table, dripping sauce down someone's arm. Nostalgia is the real seasoning. For many, pulled pork still means backyard evenings spent watching lightning bugs, ribs means sticky fingers and piles of napkins, and skillet cornbread means competing for the corner piece with the thickest crust. Maybe the food wasn't always perfect, but nobody cared. Main dishes succeeded because they were familiar, easy to share, and always linked to something happy. And what about those times when the power went out, or it rained buckets and the fire wouldn't catch? That's when other secrets came up, spreading the pans out under a porch roof, sharing umbrellas, using a neighbor's grill across the yard. Nothing could stop those feasts, because hunger and hope kept the tradition burning. Even today, people try to capture that flavor. Bottled barbecue sauces line the shelves at every store, but the old recipes stick around, copied from dog-eared note cards and scrawled in pencil in someone's cookbook. You can find sprigs of thyme from a nearby yard, or start a smoky fire, and suddenly you're right back there, hungry and young, waiting for supper to finally be declared ready. But the stories behind these dishes go even deeper. Ask anybody who grew up with these suppers, and they'll tell you tales of legendary meals. Like the summer when Aunt Loretta brought her famous honey mustard ribs, and a thunderstorm chased everyone into the garage, where folks sat on overturned buckets, eating straight off foil trays, still laughing and licking sauce from their fingers. Or the time Grandpa decided to try a Yankee recipe and accidentally smoked the chicken so long it looked like a piece of charcoal. Best crunch I ever had. Someone joked, and it turned into a family classic everyone playfully requested afterward. Details mattered, like the sound of the grill popping and spitting, the sight of chicken skin bubbling with fat, or the lazy clouds of smoke drifting through the trees, setting every dog in the neighborhood on high alert. People would hover around the grill, noses twitching, eyes squinting through the smoke, trying to guess how much longer until that first plate was ready. The emotions ran high too. Kids would dart between the legs of grown-ups, stealing slivers of hot meat the moment backs were turned, earning mock scoldings and secret winks. There was a sense of togetherness, a feeling that the meal tasted better just because you were sharing it, with cousins you only saw twice a year, neighbors you barely knew, or with friends who drove for hours just for a plate piled high with everything fresh off the fire. Sometimes, the main dish was actually a lesson too. Young kids learned how to mix a spice rub or test when cornbread was done, listening closely to advice like, if it jiggles in the middle, give it another minute, or don't crowd the chicken or it'll steam, not crisp. These small moments built confidence and made everyone feel useful, no matter their age or skill with a spatula. All these little things, the stories, the laughter, the mistakes, even the waiting, they turned supper into more than just a meal. They made each bite taste richer, more meaningful, and, somehow, just impossible to forget. But here's the thing, main dishes might have gotten all the fame, but real Southern suppers lived and died by their sides. Ever wondered what made them so good you went back for thirds? That's what we're talking about next. The sides that could steal any show. If you ever sat at a backyard supper table in the 1970s, you remember the sides. They piled up, each a masterpiece in its own right, humming with flavor, nostalgia, and the hands that made them. Sides turned a simple meal into a feast. They were the dishes everyone reached for first, disappeared the fastest, and got talked about long after the last bite was gone. Let's start with something you could smell before seeing. Collard greens, thrown into a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock, slow simmered until they were silky and rich. These greens filled the air with a deep, smoky aroma that drifted from the kitchen right out to the backyard. The greens soaked up all the savory goodness from the pork, so each bite was both earthy and meaty. Some folks splashed on vinegar for a tangy pop. Others liked a dash of pepper sauce. The greens were more than just a side, they were a link to the past, a dish born out of necessity that turned cheap greens into something you'd crave for days. Buttermilk biscuits were always in high demand. Each family had its biscuit champion, and arguments broke out about whose method was best, soft dough with your hands, or stiff dough with a fork, chilled lard, or melted butter. Some bakers kept their recipe a secret, passing it down only to the most trusted. Biscuits went in hot ovens, sometimes on metal pans so old they were black as coal. In minutes, they puffed up golden brown, flaky on the outside, pillowy in the middle. The lucky first to get one would split it, let the steam curl up, and slather it thick with butter or spoonfuls of jam. They weren't just for breakfast. Biscuits mopped up gravy from the main dishes, paired with salty ham or soaked up honey at the end of the night. Some even stacked them with fried green tomatoes for a treat. Now, if you closed your eyes while the biscuits baked, you might hear the kitchen's soundtrack, someone humming as they folded the dough, a spatula clinking against the side of a mixing bowl, and that quick intake of breath when someone peeked into the oven and saw those biscuits rise. Grandmas would joke, if you can't get a biscuit to lift, you'll never get a husband. And everyone would laugh, remembering tales of hard, flat biscuits from years past. Sweet potatoes made regular appearances, especially as autumn set in. Sometimes just slow roasted with their skins on, other times dressed up with a brown sugar glaze until their caramelized edges crackled under the fork. The sugar, melted down and spooned over, bubbled into every crevice, blending with butter, cinnamon, and a whisper of nutmeg. Kids loved the extra crispy bits, adults argued over whether marshmallows belonged on top, and everyone agreed they were the perfect sweet counter to the salty, smoky main dishes. One family story goes that Cousin Henry would always accidentally claim 2 helpings of sweet potatoes, swearing he was just helping clear the bowl. His mom knew better. She had to double the recipe just to keep him and his uncles from fighting over the sticky, caramelized slices left on the bottom of the pan. Then there was fried okra, a crunchy, popping delight nobody could resist. Pods were sliced up and tossed in cornmeal, seasoned just right, before getting fried in tall, cast-iron skillets. When they hit the oil, they snapped, sizzled, and changed from slick green to crispy gold in minutes. You could grab a handful and eat it just like popcorn while standing outside, watching the sun dip behind the barn. Not every kid loved okra, but the right fry, hot, salted, never slimy, turned even skeptics into believers. Grown-ups said you knew you were grown when you craved the taste of fried okra with everything. Consider Miss Leela, who always claimed that patience was the secret to perfect okra. She'd say, "Don't hurry. Let the oil tell you when it's ready. You hear that sizzle? That's the sound of supper." More than one neighbor confided they didn't even realize they liked okra until they tasted hers, hot from the pan and sprinkled with just enough salt to make your mouth water. Behind every side dish was a story, and often a recipe card yellowed by time. Handwritten notes: add a pinch more salt. Papa likes 2 cloves of garlic. Let cool before frosting. Sometimes whole cookbooks grew from these scraps, passed between generations like treasure. Every smudge, every correction, spoke of a dish loved, tweaked, and loved again. And with each passing year, the sides evolved. Maybe butter was swapped for oil, or bacon got replaced by smoked turkey. Some vegetables grew in backyard patches: tomatoes, beans, squash, tested by weather and patience, picked in the cool of the early morning. The garden shaped what made it to the table, connecting each bite back to fresh earth, honest sweat, and the hands who tended the rows. Every supper was an opportunity to show off, but also to remember. At reunions, Aunt Bonnie always brought her 3-cheese macaroni, so creamy it threatened to spill off the plate. Old Mr. Parks had a way with vinegar slaw, crisp and sharp enough to wake you up after a heavy meal. Kids loved corn pudding, that sweet, salty mash-up baked until golden across the top. Warm potato salad, tangy with mustard, often disappeared before the main course even landed. The beauty of these sides was their simplicity. They didn't need hard-to-find ingredients, just care and patience. Where others might rush, here folks took time, slowly stirring beans over a campfire, layering fresh cucumbers and onions for pickled salads, or slicing perfect rounds of tomato for a platter with nothing more than salt, pepper, and a little drizzle of oil. When something went wrong, burned bottoms, too much salt, biscuits that wouldn't rise, the solution was always the same: laugh about it, pass another plate, and try again tomorrow. Just imagine a family kitchen at noon on Sunday, hot sun peeking in, Grandpa shuffling through the back door with fresh-picked green beans, the youngest cousin sneaking a fingerful of biscuit dough when everyone's back is turned. You might hear the sizzle of bacon bits dropping into a skillet for green beans, or the tinny sound of a spoon tapping the lid of cast iron to check if the greens are ready. Someone's always telling a joke. A distant radio plays gospel or old country tunes, and half the chairs are already pulled out, ready for the meal to come. The stories followed the dishes. Mama learned to make these greens during the Depression, said the secret was the ham bone we had to beg off a neighbor. Granddad's cornbread tasted like sawdust until he got the pan hot enough to smoke. Aunt Tilly wrote her biscuit recipe on a scrap of envelope 17 years ago, and no one's dared change it since. With every side dish came a tale of perseverance and stubborn hope. The recipes weren't just instructions, they were love letters, coated with family jokes and advice. Sides also taught lessons. Kids started by slicing summer squash, got shown how to snap green beans, or learned to mash potatoes with a big wooden spoon. Every step, every mistake, was a step toward independence, pride, and skill. Even so, the best cooks knew the meal was about everyone together. You could taste the care, and you could feel the weight of tradition, right down to the last lick of gravy. You ever wonder why so many people still crave these humble, homegrown sides, even with all the fancy options nowadays? Maybe it's because they taste like belonging, like home. Maybe it's because, for a minute, everyone at the table can forget their troubles and just savor something made with real love. But the true magic happened when sides and mains came together, not just on plates, but under summer skies, surrounded by laughter and the low hum of conversation. So how did these backyard suppers become more than meals? How did they turn into whole community events that everyone still talks about? Let's head outside and find out. Step outside on a soft summer evening, and you'd see whole neighborhoods coming together. Backyard suppers weren't just about food. They were the heartbeat of the community, pulsing with laughter, stories, and the feeling that everyone, for one night, belonged. Picture a yard transformed by string lights and folding tables. Cicadas buzzed in the trees, kids darted through the grass in bare feet, and grown-ups set up platters next to mason jars brimming with sweet tea. Dogs wagged between guests, hopeful for a dropped biscuit or stray rib bone. Even before the first bite, the energy was thick. A hum of anticipation, a sense of occasion, strung tight as clean white tablecloths. Shared meals meant shared stories. Someone always brought a guitar or harmonica, and before you knew it, the music tumbled over picnic tables, carrying old songs and new ones, blending with the smells rising from the grill. Kids circled up for games, Red Rover, tag, hide and seek, shrieking with laughter as dusk settled in. Parents traded stories, bragged on gardens and recipes, swapped advice on everything from canning peaches to teaching a stubborn mule to plow straight. Potluck traditions made these gatherings possible. Everybody brought something, and the table exploded with variety. Tiny slips of paper labeled each casserole or cake. A potato salad from the Hamptons, tangy from extra mustard, sat next to Aunt Mabel's tomato pie, studded with herbs from her window box. Someone always overdid the deviled eggs, filling a whole tray and then some, while a neighbor's peach cobbler, warm under foil, tempted everyone to sneak dessert before dinner. These meals let everyone be creative. Sometimes supper included recipes no one had ever tried. Okra fritters, spiced apple chutney, or corn pudding thickened with double the usual eggs. Folks traded tips and laughed about the flops as much as the hits. That cake was lopsided. But oh, the flavor. Or, remember that time we roasted a whole pig and it rolled off the spit? The stories grew with each retelling, stretching facts but never the warmth. Passing down recipes became a favorite ritual. Young kids helped bake biscuits under watchful eyes, learning to knead dough just so or measure buttermilk without spilling. Teens got their first try at grilling, working tongs like magic wands. Somewhere, an elder whispered the real secret to perfect peach ice cream, and only a few lucky ears caught it. Old wooden recipe boxes changed hands, sometimes for the first time in decades, sealing family bonds with the promise of future meals. Getting set up was a production in itself. Early risers moved picnic tables into shady spots, others strung up lights between maple trees, while someone's uncle hammered a croquet stake into the hardest patch of lawn. Neighbors pitched in without being asked. Dishes arrived hot from kitchens or coolers, wrapped in towels or foil. No one ever worried about running out. There was always just enough. And when it was all over, everyone found a job, stacking chairs, scraping plates, washing pans in giant tubs, and sharing one last story before heading home. The best memories stuck like barbecue sauce to a shirt you just couldn't get clean, sweet, persistent, and always there when you needed to recall a better time. People talk about the way the stars showed up on clear nights, the lazy drift of fireflies after dusk, or the burst of laughter when someone knocked over a pitcher of lemonade. Sensory details fused with emotion. Cool grass underfoot, the tang of vinegar on greens, the sticky hands of a child grabbing one more cookie. Every sense danced together, shaping moments that stuck. Sometimes, these events marked big moments. Weddings beneath a handmade arch, birthday cakes with flaming candles, neighbors saying goodbye before a cross-country move. They brought comfort during harder days. 2. Meals after funerals, quiet support offered with a squeeze of the hand or a second piece of pie. No crisis was faced alone when a community could gather, eat, reminisce, and remember that no sorrow, no joy, ever lasted in isolation. Backyard suppers also taught teamwork. Kids learned their chores meant something: carrying dishes, refilling drinks, scraping sticky trays. They saw grown-ups working together, smoothing over squabbles and sharing tools, and soaked up the lesson that every job, even the messy ones, mattered. Many grew up cherishing these simple moments, vocational lessons that ran deeper than any school assignment. Years later, folks still remember who always brought what. "That was Mrs. Barnes's chess pie," someone says, or "Don't you miss Uncle Tom's slow smoked chicken?" Food memories became people memories too. Their quirks, the way they laughed or told tall tales, a unique blend of recipe and personality. And here's what's wild. You could move hundreds of miles, grow up and get busy. But one taste of a certain coleslaw or smell of smoked meat could take you straight back to that backyard. The tradition lives on. Every time someone strings up lights and calls the neighborhood over, even if it's just a handful of friends and a pan of beans. Sometimes, you'd see an extra table unfold at the last minute, just as a new family from down the street wandered over, shy smiles on their faces, casserole dish in hand. There's always room. Always. And by the end of the night, they'd laugh like they'd lived there forever. One year, I remember a surprise thunderstorm rumbling through. A wall of wind knocked over paper plates and had everyone scrambling. For a minute, you could hear someone shout, "Grab the brownies," while others pulled folding chairs under the carport, clutching bowls and babies and umbrellas. When the rain finally passed, everyone just brushed off the wet and kept the meal going, story swapping between bites under the shelter. There's something almost magical about the way the ordinary becomes extraordinary at these meals. Folks who hadn't talked all winter joked together like old friends. The prickly neighbor who frowned all year suddenly became the grill master, barking orders and flipping burgers with a twinkle in his eye. You might hear stories about someone's first job, or the one summer when the tomatoes grew giant as basketballs, or even laughter about the time someone tried to fry catfish and almost caught the patio on fire. Kids made up games with flashlights as the sky faded to purple, and every so often, you'd hear someone call, "Time for s'mores," and see a stampede toward the fire pit. The smallest children, sticky with marshmallow, would beg for just one more before bedtime. Grown-ups lingered too, voices low and soft, sharing memories or secrets under those string lights that made the whole world seem gentle. It wasn't just about having food together, it was about weaving a safety net, knot by knot, with every handshake, every recipe passed down, every "let me help you with that." These gatherings sparkled with a special kind of belonging. You knew, deep down, that if you ever needed anything, these were the folks who'd show up, maybe carrying a casserole, maybe just a hug, but always, always there. And really, isn't that the magic at the heart of it all? The way a simple backyard supper can turn ordinary neighbors into lifelong friends? But what happens to that sense of connection now? In a world running faster than ever, does the warmth of those backyard suppers still echo in our lives today? Stick around, because next, we're digging into the hidden legacy and lasting lessons of these unforgettable gatherings. There's something about a memory that sticks tight to your bones, especially when it's built on the smell of barbecue drifting on summer air, the taste of a biscuit you helped bake, and the chorus of a dozen voices sharing old stories under the stars. Hillbilly Backyard Suppers weren't just meals. They were blueprints for belonging, lessons in gratitude, and the foundation stones for many families and communities. That legacy ripples out today, touching kitchens and hearts in ways you might not expect. Go into any southern kitchen today, and chances are you'll find a dog-eared recipe tucked in a drawer, faded almost to nothing, its corners soft from decades of use. Maybe it's a cornbread written in your great-grandmother's shaky script, or a collard green recipe demanding bacon grease, no shortcuts. These dishes aren't just tasty, They're heirlooms, edible history passed down, tweaked, kept alive with every meal. They bridge generations, connecting Sunday afternoons in the 1970s with busy weeknights now, wrapping grandchildren and grandparents in a shared story that tastes a lot like hope. Nostalgia plays a huge role in the revival of these classic recipes. There's a big movement among home cooks and even fancy chefs to dig up old family favorites. You see folks on YouTube and Instagram sharing videos of scratch-made biscuits, 12-hour pork roasts, or pies like the ones their grannies used to cut into fat triangles. There's something comforting about the slow pace, the imperfect edges, the feeling that these meals don't rush you. They invite you to sit, share, and really see each other. Some families have started holding their own backyard suppers again, even in cities where grass is hard to find, because they crave what those evenings gave: togetherness and simplicity. Big meals made small kitchens feel bigger. A folding table in a driveway, plates balanced on knees, kids tucked under jackets, swapping new stories and old jokes. The food doesn't always look like it did in old photos, but the smells and tastes bring everyone closer together. Modern twists, vegan beans, gluten-free biscuits show up beside the classics, proving that the heart of these gatherings isn't in perfect replication, but in the act of gathering at all. Chefs across America have started to honor these traditions, too, folding regional specialties into upscale menus. Hillbilly cooking is finally getting respect, not just as poor folks' food, but as a vital, creative way of celebrating the seasons, resourcefulness, and flavor. You'll see preserved ramps or skillet cornbread paired with high-end steaks, or buttermilk brine chicken getting featured in glossy magazines. What was once humble is now recognized as genius in its own right. There are practical lessons here the world is hungry for. Make do with what you have. Let nothing go to waste. Share your best and your last. And don't be afraid to mix old ideas with new ones. The art of adapting, using cornmeal instead of flour, greens from a ditch bank when money runs low, swapping, trading, laughing off mistakes. These are skills that matter as much now as they did when electricity was new and kitchens were lit by kerosene lanterns. The backyard supper taught self-reliance, but also generosity. You never ate alone if you could help it, and you always brought more than you thought you could spare. Listen to the stories of those still keeping the flame alive, and you'll hear a seasoned biscuit maker pass on her secrets to her daughter, a grill master show his grandson the best way to stack hickory wood, or a teenager share his first attempt at making real pit beans for a potluck. Communities revive the tradition at church picnics, city block parties, and even online, swapping stories and recipes, making each dining table, no matter how small, a stage for belonging. The broader cultural impact is everywhere. Backyard suppers taught us the power of hospitality done simply. No matching napkins, no Instagram perfect platters, just food meant to fill you and company meant to warm you. The identity that rises up from those communal meals lives on every time you bring a new friend to the table. Every time you lean in to say, "Try this, it's an old family favorite." And every time a recipe gets scrawled over to the next cook in line. So maybe the pace of life changed, and maybe we eat with our phones too close and our eyes on the clock. Still, the lesson of the backyard supper endures. Make food that matters, with folks who matter, and treat every meal, big or small, fancy or plain, as a chance to remember where you came from and share what you love. Maybe that's how these classic country suppers keep living on, in the taste of something simple, and the company of those you welcome home. And that's the thing. What other traditions are waiting quietly, ready to come back the second we remember how good it feels to belong?